over at this juncture?
Sure, yeah. And if anyone has any additional questions that you want to ask, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to type in a question and we will get to it. We are going to, we have quite a few questions, really good questions that have come in. So I'll just read those out and we're going to go till 8 o'clock. So if we have any questions that haven't been answered by then, we're going to send out all the answers to you afterward by the email that you used to register for the event. So the first question that we have is, how might more data, say collected via citizen science, be helpful in understanding and eventually addressing the issues facing the China Lake watershed? So I can say there are a few citizen science volunteers. So the Lake Stewards of Maine, which is formerly the Volunteer Lake Monitoring Program, helps to certify people for water quality monitoring. And I don't know if Steve, you have anything to say about the particular programs that CLA might have for volunteer water quality monitoring.
I do. The programs that historically were conducted by CLA are now transferred and conducted by the China Region Lakes Alliance under the direction of Scott Peers, former president of CLA. So all those programs are still functioning. And Scott, now as executive director of CRLA, intends to move those forward. So they are still active, and I believe as we gradually move away from the COVID crisis, they'll become more active in the future.
Yeah, so I think to answer the question, yes, more data is helpful. The more water quality data we have, the easier it is to see the trends and sort of what's happening. So if you are interested in that, contact CRLA. The next question is, would oxygenation of the lake reduce internal phosphorus loading in the lake as it does in the Androscoggin River? Is it feasible? I'll send that one to Jen.
Okay, yeah, so I know I just added Ken as someone that could speak up, Ken, so feel free to speak up because Ken did a lot of work on the feasibility side of the internal loading. But from Ken's report, I pulled this information here on the screen, hypolimnetic oxygenation. It could increase oxygen in deep water, limit the release of phosphorus from the sediment. We'd expect a 75% reduction and enhance habitat for cold water fish. So there's some benefits to oxygenation. However, the estimated cost of the infrastructure that goes into putting oxygen into the lake would be around $4 million with annual operation costs of about $450,000.
This is Ken. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And Jen's got it right. The thing is, it's not a bad idea at all. If money and permits were no object, oxygenating this lake would be a very good thing to do. The problem is, aside from just the cost, which you were just told, it's a bit of a permitting nightmare because you're putting a lot of structures in the lake. These could catch anchors, fishing lines, whatever else. There are maybe some slightly easier ways to do some of it if you have enough depth. That would work in the West Basin to some degree, but just releasing pure oxygen bubbles in the East Basin would destratify it and potentially make things worse in the short run. So oxygenation is one of these things that on paper, it's a wonderful thing to do. In actual practice, it's a lot more difficult than what we lay out on paper. And the cost was so much higher than phosphorus inactivation that that's not where we think you'd be going.
Thank you, Ken and Jen. I have two similar questions, so I'm going to ask them both. What are the downsides or risks of an alum treatment? And then the other question was, one of the biggest challenges will be to address the concerns of folks about the safety and possible adverse effects of, quote, dumping chemicals in the lake. Thoughts on that? And Jen or Ken, either of you.
I can start, and then Ken, if you want to finish up. So it was two different questions, Amanda?
Yeah, same. They're basically asking the same thing.
Okay. So the downsides or risks, one important one is that maybe it doesn't work as well as we want it to. That's a risk. You know, lakes are complicated systems, and we do our best to understand and make our best guess at what's needed in terms of inactivating the sediment. Aluminum treatments have come a long way in terms of how they're applied, and there's an intensive monitoring that's involved. There's permitting involved. The greatest risk is with aluminum sulfate is caustic. So making sure that you're monitoring the pH of the water as the aluminum is being applied. It is buffered with a sodium aluminate at the same time to keep the pH down. So when it's applied, there's actually another boat behind the alum barge that is monitoring the pH the whole time, and conductivity and some other things, so that they can notify the barge if something looks like the pH is
I
changing.
can add to that. There's a lot of complicated chemistry. There's only a handful of people who even admit to being aluminum chemists. I'm not one of them. Aluminum under certain circumstances can be toxic. If you let the pH get outside of the range of about 6 to 8, there will be enough of the form of aluminum that's toxic to potentially cause problems. Doesn't mean it will, but if you stay within 6 to 8, it's very hard to have enough aluminum in a toxic form to have an impact. We've done some treatments in very sensitive places with very low alkalinity. The last time there was a fish kill in New England was the year 2000. So we now have 21 years of successful treatments without any fish kills. It's a matter of mastering the technique. There's only a couple companies that actually do these applications, and they're both very capable.
Great. And sticking with the alum theme, there's a few other questions here. What is the source of the aluminum that is used for the treatment? Are there any negative health issues? I'm assuming that means human health issues with treating the lake with alum. And what time of year is the alum applied?
Okay, I can jump on that if you want.
Thank you.
We mostly find old storm doors and toss them. No, I'm kidding. It's a manufactured chemical. It is in your area. There's one in Searsport that makes it. GCX, I think, G something. They're down this way where I'm in Massachusetts. The Holland company out in the western part makes it. In New Jersey, there's yet another company. They kind of distribute themselves so that they don't really compete physically, at least for the alum. The sodium aluminate is a more specialized chemical and usually comes from Massachusetts. So they actually make it. Aluminum sulfate is basically sulfuric acid being applied to an aluminum base, and that creates it, and it comes in a liquid form. The health issue is, I'll say, unproven. Again, it can be a toxic element, so it's not good for anybody in that toxic form. If you go online, you can find articles or websites that claim that it's potentially implicated in neurological diseases like Alzheimer's. I will tell you that most of that has been debunked. Be very, very careful about just believing what you read online. Most of you should know that. It's not a trustworthy source unless it's been thoroughly vetted. But I won't try to tell anybody that you're putting a chemical in the water. Same way they do it in a lot of water supplies before you drink it. And aluminum actually is one of the major chemicals used in water treatment before it goes out in the distribution system for you to consume. That's why those aluminum manufacturers exist where they are. They're serving the drinking water and wastewater industry. They're not there for lake treatments. We're a very minor part of it. And then the third part was when they get done. Well, we don't do them in the winter. It's hard to work on the ice. But you can really start as early as April when you get ice out, and you can go all the way through the summer. I much prefer spring treatments because at that point, very little phosphorus has come out of the sediment. You don't have the low oxygen. It hasn't built up the way Janice explained it. So you're locking it into the sediment right away, and you get a great summer after it. If you wait until fall, you get good results, but you've just lived through a tough summer, and there's a lot of phosphorus in the water column. And the aluminum strips the phosphorus out of the water column at a lower efficiency than it binds it up in the sediment where the concentration's a lot higher. Again, there's a lot of complicated chemistry going on, but you can do it anytime that you can get access to the lake and do it. The reactions are slowed down in colder water, but they work. But the spring is kind of ideal because it gives you the most immediate results and the most complete removal you can get.
Great. And it looks like we brought Robbie Bickford on from Kennebec Water District to maybe answer this question that just came in. Does the Kennebec Water District use alum in their treatment of water from the West Basin?
Yeah, so the Kennebec Water District does use alum as a coagulation chemical for the treatment of drinking water at the filtration plant.
Awesome, thank you. And then the last question right now related to alum treatments was just addressing the failure of the 3 Mile Pond treatment and what we think caused that not to work. So I believe it was underdosed.
Yeah, that's the assumption at this point. I wasn't involved with that one. It goes way back. What we understood in the 1980s is about 1/10 of what we understand now. If you go back and look at treatments back then, there were fish kills because they put it in without any buffering and the lakes couldn't handle it. Not so much in Maine, other places. But getting the right dose, it was basically done based on how much aluminum could you put in before the pH got too low, because they were just using alum, aluminum sulfate, which makes it go acidic. Now, all this testing of the sediment, that's all the last decade that we figured that out. And then understanding the ratio of the chemicals. When these guys are applying it, they're usually using a 2-to-1 ratio by volume of alum to aluminate. That keeps the pH wherever it's at. If we want the pH to go up or down, we start adjusting in hundredths. I mean, it's amazingly fine-tuned. It's like if any of you have a technical background in something, a lot of people won't understand the detail that you get in to do your job right. That's what these guys have to do. And it's monitored. We're looking at the pH and the alkalinity while they're doing it. It's a pretty straightforward process now. Not that you couldn't mess up, but nobody has in 21 years.
And then another question came in. Does treating the lake with alum limit the use of the lake for a period of time post-treatment? If yes, how long? From my experience, they tend to discourage boating in the area where they're putting down the alum while it's happening. And then there is monitoring that happens post-treatment, but the alum is designed to settle out very quickly. So usually it's, the next day you can use it, but I don't know, Ken, if you have more to say on that.
Now, the restriction for keeping out of the area is just so you don't interfere with the barge or the people
Right.
doing it, safety. Now, there really isn't a hazard while they're treating. There's, again, they're going to be treating in deep water. It's not likely to even be anywhere near where anybody would be swimming. So that hasn't been an issue. It hasn't been a problem. We look at an underwater camera and watch the flock forming and settle, and we routinely see fish swimming through it and everything else. There was a concern early on that small fish that eat plankton, the alewife would be a good example, might think that the flock particles were something to eat and they would consume it, and that might be a problem for them. It's never happened, never materialized. In Massachusetts, they won't let us treat in the spring when alewife are spawning. There's absolutely no science behind that. In fact, they'll let us treat in the fall when the juveniles are all going around the lake looking for a way out. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But there has not been a problem at all with that.
Okay, speaking of alewives, someone asked, how will the alewives help improve water quality now that all the barriers have been removed? And that slide that you have up does address that to some extent.
Question was, how will they improve water quality?
Yeah, or that was how it was worded.
No, there's models out there that suggest that you could get everything from a reduction in phosphorus to an increase in phosphorus based on how many adult alewife come in, how many die, how many juveniles they produce, and how many of those make it through to leave. It's a very contentious area. I will tell you only if you think about it evolutionarily, it would not make any sense for an organism like an alewife to deplete the fertility of the lake it spawns in. They will raise less young and the species would go extinct. On the other hand, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that they would totally trash the lake by over fertilizing it. So my guess is it's probably close to a net zero. And you're going to have good years and bad years, depending on how many come in and how many go out. You can make the model say anything you want. I know of no real data that will prove it one way or the other. But the claims that the alewife are going to clean up the lake, I don't think that's substantiated. I think claims that they're going to destroy the lake are also not substantiated. I get concerned about the loss of zooplankton because this alewife are going to eat all the zooplankton. So for whatever level of fertility you're at, you're going to have more algae and less clarity. But it can't be worse than most of what you have now. When they've come into eutrophic lakes, it's made virtually no difference, and the data in Maine show that. But they haven't done this in a lot of oligotrophic lakes, lakes that are already very clear. So we don't really have the data to show that. I can tell you that I've looked at it in lakes where we've done aluminum treatments. I was trying to figure out why some of my aluminum treated lakes do better than others. And alewife are one of the factors. When I have alewife, they don't get as clear. They are acceptably clear. People are happy with the results, and they don't have blue-green blooms. The alewife are not causing those blooms. Of course, they haven't been in this lake much, so they're not the cause of what you've had anyway. So I would not make a case for alewife saving your lake. On the other hand, we kept those alewife out. They're a major boom for the whole ecology of everything down to the estuarine areas of the ocean. I think those that want to restore alewife have the moral high ground here. You know, they belong in these lakes, and we kept them out. But when you bring them back, do not think that they're going to save your lake. That doesn't seem to be happening.
I would say also for the plan, Kennebec Water District is working with the project partners, including Maine Department of Marine Resources, to monitor alewives coming in and out, especially over the next 5 to 8 years as the populations increase, in coordination with collecting water quality data. We don't have any zooplankton data in the lake, so that's something that we'd like to start collecting for China Lake.
Great, good answers there. Switching gears here a little bit. This next question is, who is responsible for going after grants? Is it the town of China, DP, other? I guess it depends on the grant, but Jen, do you want to talk a little bit more about that? Or Steve?
Yeah, we try in the action plan, we tried to identify, depending on the action and the plan, who would be the lead organization for that action. I think for watershed type restoration work like Lake Smart, Youth Conservation Corps, road projects, right now, all of that's going through CRLA, China Regional Lakes Alliance, and with support from the China Lake Association in terms of the fundraising side of things and outreach. But I mean, the towns, can help through like TIF funding potentially. And I think we have to, as one of the components of the management plan is to develop a sustainable funding plan in the first year of planning to figure out where the funds are going to come from.
Great. And where can we find this presentation to review online, the recording?
The recording will be provided to the China Lake Association that they can post on their website.
Great. Could you talk a little bit about alternatives to alum treatments? So we had a question about hypolimnetic withdrawal and a question about dredging.
Okay, those sound like good questions for Ken.
What was the first alternative beside dredging?
Hypolimnetic withdrawal, which is addressed on the
okay.
slide that's
Sure.
up right now.
Hypolimnetic withdrawal is an easy one to deal with. If you pull the poor quality water out faster than it can become poor quality water, basically keep it moving so that you don't lose all the oxygen. That requires a huge amount of water to go out at a fairly rapid rate, and you would destratify the lake. That's probably not a good idea in this case. If you want to just pull it out periodically so that you're discharging that poor quality water, I have seen that work twice in my career. Thankfully, my career is in the 45-year range now, because the first one took 30 years and the second one took 25 years. I don't know anybody who's willing to wait that long. Those were not cases where they were using that as a restoration technique. They just had a major input of stuff and it was their practice to discharge that way. And it did, in fact, take care of it after several decades. It just doesn't work very quickly. Dredging, on the other hand, is absolutely the best thing to do if money and permits are no object. If you could remove the sediment that's accumulated in those lakes, you would truly restore the lake. Most of what we do is lake rehabilitation. We don't really restore anything because we don't know enough to put everything back exactly the way it was. But if you take the sediment out that has accumulated over the last, well, since the last ice age, you've really set the lake back in geologic time, and you can make quite a difference, but the expense is phenomenal. The low end estimate is about $50,000 per acre foot of material to take out. An acre foot is 1,613 cubic yards. It's a huge cost. And getting permits to put the stuff somewhere, given that we'll have some contaminants in it, is also an issue. If the stuff is clean enough, you could put it in an agricultural setting, but it's not like they're looking for that fertilized material because it's very mucky. It has to be blended in with the soil. It's not permeable. The water would, you can't just spread it out on the farm field and expect it'll work. So dredging is a pretty tough one to pull off. Again, if money and permits were no object, I would dredge a lot of lakes. It's a really effective strategy, but the cost is just just outrageous on something like this.
Yeah, given that China Lake is so big, it would be logistically and cost prohibitive.
Oh, the one other thing about hypomletic withdrawal, when you pull that water out, it has to go somewhere. So you're basically discharging it to the downstream environment. That may have negative consequences and may also require permits that are hard to get.
All right, this next question is from the chat. Should there be increased focus on the Hunter Brook Basin, given its importance as a source of external loading? Jen might be the best one to answer that. And you're muted.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think that there's definitely some interest from Colby and some of the project partners to start doing some stream sampling at the outlet of Hunter Brook to kind of look at what's coming into the lake from the Hunter Brook watershed. And then also, focusing some remediation efforts over there. But it's actually, when we looked at phosphorus loading in terms of per acre load, the Hunter Brook watershed, even though it's big, didn't turn out to be the watersheds that had the highest expected loading by area. So some of the smaller watersheds, actually, like in the West Basin, in the direct shoreline areas, are the areas where we're seeing the highest loads of phosphorus coming from, not necessarily Hunter Brook, even though the size of the watershed is big.
Great, thank you. I'm not exactly sure what this next question is getting at, but it's about discarding aluminum cooking utensils. So I'm guessing this is, not wanting to cook with aluminum based on some of these questions about ties to neurological disease. And so I think, Ken, you already kind of talked about this, but why would you recommend getting rid of these and then put alum into the lake then? I guess is the question.
Everything has risks. I mean, I laugh because I work with several groups that use oxygenation because they don't want to put a chemical in their water. Guess what? Oxygen's a chemical. And it's also manufactured when you put it in this way. And it also can have negative effects. Really high oxygen toxic isn't the right word. It basically burns things up. It's reactive. It eats up the pipes that you put it in on. Extremely high levels could cause gas bubble disease in fish. So everything has a risk. The aluminum has not proven to be a major problem. It's the second most abundant metal in the crust of the earth after iron, and they're close. What they found in Maine is places that naturally have high aluminum do not have problems with internal recycling. And the ratio needs to be about 3 to 1, 3 times the aluminum that you have of iron. When we go into the places that have problems, we invariably find it's closer to 1 to 1, or the iron's even more abundant. So all we're doing is moving the phosphorus off of iron, which gives it up when there's low oxygen, onto aluminum, which does not give up the phosphorus when there's low oxygen. It's pretty simple and pretty straightforward. aluminum is not really a scary chemical or a scary element. When you put it in combination with other things to deliver it, that's when you have to know what you're doing to get it right. But yes, I'm not going to tell you there's no risk. Absolutely, there's a risk in everything. And there's a huge risk in doing nothing. So keep that in mind.
Maybe Ken speak to the point about, I think the concern is that she's going to be swimming in aluminum.
Now, oh, yeah, it's out of the water column pretty fast. It again, Robbie Bickford could tell you, they put it in, and in minutes to an hour, the stuff has settled out of solution. It's not going anywhere. What we find in the lakes we have is that a small residual amount of aluminum binds onto dissolved organic carbon and stays in the water for up to 2 months afterwards at a very low level, not a toxic level at all, even if the pH was crazy. It's strictly that you put it in, it combines, it flocculates, it undergoes this process, settles out, and it's gone. And again, tiny amount might still be in the water column, and even that is gone. The longest we've ever gone without getting back to background levels is 2 months. And there was nothing wrong the next day after treatment that would be an issue for any person drinking the water.
Mhm. Yeah, and DEP, as part of the permit for adding aluminum to a lake, requires monitoring of aluminum. I think they do it even a couple of years after the treatment. So it will be monitored. This question is, will the current abundance of aquatic plants in the lake be reduced by an alum treatment?
Now you're treating different areas. The plants only grow where light penetrates, and the area we're trying to treat is deeper where the light does not penetrate. So they're separate. You might get a little bit of drift to flock into, shallower water where there might be some plants. It's never killed plants that I know of, and we've had to monitor the plants in many places. It's not really an issue for
I
them.
think there's a second part of that question is, if you have lower concentrations of phosphorus in the water, might you see fewer things like American waterweed that thrive on high concentrations of phosphorus? Because I know at like East Pond and China Lake, American waterweed, floats all around and shows up in like big piles along the shoreline. And that's an indication that the lake is enriched and has high levels of nutrients that
Yeah,
are growing them.
in general, the aluminum treatments tend to lead to more plants because they make the water clearer, and now the light penetrates further and the plants can better grow. Certain types of plants that actually get some nutrition from the water column may suffer, but the vast majority of rooted plants are getting their phosphorus out of the sediment via their roots. So it hasn't really been an issue. Again, I don't find it to be a major factor in lakes like you have, where rooted plants aren't really a huge issue. I wouldn't expect it to become one.
Great. The next question is about how critical it is to determine the right formula or the right dosage amounts for the lake, as well as the need for additional sediment sampling, specifically in the north end of the East Basin. I don't know if we want
Question
to go
about
back to
aluminum
the,
dose.
yeah, we have some slides on that. I don't know if you want to go back.
Basically, we're looking at the amount of phosphorus that needs to be inactivated in the sediment, and then treating to match up the amount of aluminum with what we need to do. So it does vary based on the quality of the sediment as you go around the lake. There you go. Go ahead, Jen.
I was just going back to the slide that, shows the different doses in the different areas in each of the
Right.
lakes.
And they're based on the sediment features. It's not based on the water at all. Now, when we apply it, we never put in more than about 25 grams per square meter at once, because we assume we have a 5 meter, 16.5 foot mixing zone. And we don't want the aluminum to be higher than about 5 milligrams per liter in that zone. There's a 3-part security blanket that keeps the aluminum from ever being toxic. One is managing the pH. One is putting the total quantity of aluminum at one time below a certain limit. And then the third is actually treating in sort of a checkerboard pattern. So we're never treating one giant area where fish couldn't get out of the way if they wanted to. Any one of those is probably sufficient, but we do all three, and that's why we haven't had any problems in 2 decades.
So
Yeah, I think-
to Scott's question, our technical advisor committee recommended highly that additional sediment analysis is needed
Yeah.
Partly because several of our sampling locations, the sediments they just weren't run, or they weren't run in a way that gave us the answers we needed.
Yeah, this is all based on really good work with 8 composite samples. This is way too big a lake to trust that. And we're real upfront about that. You would do more because it might actually give us a break on dose in areas. I mean, we'd be able to do less in
cost.
certain areas.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to cut the cost in half, and it's still very expensive, but it's an option. And again, I don't want anybody to feel like they're being sold anything. I don't do these treatments. I don't make any money off of it. It's not an economic thing for me at all. I just know it works. And other things can work too, but you have to spend the money on them and the time to get the right data. We still have a ways to go to get this nailed down, whether it's phosphorus inactivation or oxygenation. You want to do dredging, you're into a couple $100,000 feasibility study because there's a whole lot of testing to be done.
Yeah, so it is important to get the right dose, and we collected samples for the plan to be able to help write the plan, but there is more that needs to be done before we can lock those in. And part of that is to make sure that it's the right dose. It's not too much and it's not too little. So hopefully all of that answered that question. We're almost at 8 o'clock, but I think we have time for one more question. Are there any known techniques involving alum or other filtering media that could be installed in the streams or key watershed draining areas that would reduce external loading?
I'll let you take that, Ken, since you've been doing some of that work.
Yeah, I actually do this in urban areas. We put a dosing station in that literally treats the incoming stormwater. My best example is outside of Boston in Wellesley, where we treat just from before Memorial Day to just after 4th of July each year. And basically we clean up the stormwater coming in during that period. It's a pretty big watershed and a pretty small lake. It's only 100 acres, but it's got a 5,000 acre watershed. And if we get to 4th of July with our phosphorus down around 10 micrograms per liter, we know we're good for the summer. If we get to 4th of July and it's less than 20, we know we won't have blue-green blooms. It worked great for 8 years. Unfortunately, this year, if you had the weather we did, we finished treating on the 6th of July and it rained for the whole rest of July and loaded it up. The benefit in that particular lake is when it's flushing that much, it also can't develop algae blooms. So we didn't have an algae problem, but it wasn't because of our treatment. It was because the water blew through so fast. Something the size of China Lake, yeah, that you'd have to treat the water, and you'd probably have to treat more than just a few weeks worth. You'd have to think about when the runoff mostly came, maybe do it all spring and into the summer, but it would be an option. I don't recommend that for non-urban lakes. The urban lakes have watersheds that you really can't clean up. I mean, you can do something with them, but you're never going to make the truly urban land behave like it's forest. We've got a fair amount of open land here, really not a lot of development. I think you'd be better served doing the watershed management things that you've been suggested to you.
Great, thank you. And that brings us to 8 o'clock. So I think we're ready to wrap up. Jen, do you have anything else?
I do not. I just want to say I've really enjoyed working with all the project partners on this project, and thanks to Amanda, Ken for coming tonight and answering questions, and to CLA for hosting the meeting tonight, and for everyone that showed up.
Thank you, everybody, for showing up, and we really appreciate the input from Amanda, Jen, and Ken. It was excellent, wonderful comments, a lot to think about. We look forward to more developments in the near future. Thanks so much.
Take care. Good luck.